Hello, and welcome to the Classroom and the Capitol podcast, where we explore the connection between decisions made at the California State Capitol and classrooms in Kern County and beyond. We'll speak with educators, lawmakers, and stakeholders to learn more about the process and take a closer look at how the Kern County Superintendent of Schools office collaborates with school district leaders and state representatives to ensure Kern County student voices are represented in Sacramento. And now, here is your host, Carlos Rojas.
To get this podcast kicked off the right way, we're very fortunate to be joined today by Mike Zulfa, the superintendent for the Kern High School District. Welcome, Mike, and thank you so much for making yourself available to be with us this morning. I'm sure that being the superintendent of the largest high school district in California keeps your calendar pretty full, so we do appreciate you making the time.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for making the time. Just think, though, now, Mike, you can now add being the first guest on the Classroom and Capitol podcast to your resume and to your career accomplishments.
I'm looking forward to when we get like the fourth time appearance jacket or something like that.
There you go. There you go. Yeah.
5 hostings or something.
I'm not sure it's going to add any advantages to you in your career being on this podcast, but we'll at least for now pretend that it will. No, in all sincerity, we are fortunate to have you, Mike, and we get to hear from you and your experience and expertise. And today, as you know, we're going to be discussing AB 3216, which was authored by Assemblymember Hoover and was recently signed into law by our governor. And this bill requires schools to adopt a cell phone policy no later than July 1, 2026.
Right.
So before we dig into that specific issue, Mike, why don't you please start by telling us a little bit about your path to education, who or what were some of the influences or catalysts that kind of pushed you in the direction of a career in education?
All right. Well, I was a local, or I am a local product of Kern County. I went to West High School. And during my time at West High School, I had the opportunity to be influenced by some pretty amazing teachers, some of which are really just legends anymore, but people like Don Vitale, who was a English teacher, a social studies teacher, and a forensics coach, was amazing. Wayne Nunez, chemistry teacher at that time. When I saw what they did and how they did it and the impacts that they had, I thought that was something that I wanted to pursue. I thought that really fit who I was as a person and the energy that I wanted to live my life with, of being a positive impact on people. And to be honest, it really goes back to being a little kid. When you talk about what happens in elementary school, those are really important, informative years. And watching my dad as a coach also. He coached baseball and soccer and anything else that we needed him to be a coach for. But just watching his impact as a coach on the other kids on the team and what that could do. So when I graduated high school, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. I knew that I wanted to be a coach. And so that was my career path. I can't tell you exactly when or where it happened, but it was early.
That's fantastic. It's fantastic. It's a great reminder to people who are currently in the field and in the classrooms, for example, the impact that they can have on the kids who are in their classroom. So thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely.
So we go from there to now you're superintendent of the Kern High School District, and there's been some research and some conversations had in the last couple of years, probably as a direct result of what happened during the pandemic, but the career length of superintendents is getting shorter and shorter. So what made you make that jump to superintendent, especially during this tumultuous time in education?
My district, Kern High School District's been very fortunate. Our last 2 superintendents have both done 10 years, essentially, apiece. And to your point, that's unheard of.
It is.
You usually see 3.5 was like pre-pandemic, and now we're hearing it's less than 3 for a superintendent post-pandemic.
Last time it was 2.5-year average. Yeah.
Which that's crazy when you think about the stability of leadership is absolutely essential when it comes to affecting the classroom and student success. In terms of my path, like I say, I just wanted to be a guy that taught some social studies, maybe coached a little bit, and that was like my career goal.
Yeah.
But my district and myself personally, we put a real focus and a real value on servant leadership. And, you do the right things in order to assist kids. You do the right things to affect academic achievement and social emotional welfare. And you don't worry so much like, what was the goal to be the superintendent? No, the goal was to do my best. I feel like I've been very fortunate and blessed in so many different ways by my community, by my district, by the people that I work with. The least I could do is try to give back in any way possible. And when the opportunity arose to provide leadership for the Kern High School District, I felt like that was a great opportunity for me to be able to, take another step forward in my journey and to hopefully pay it forward to the people who were behind me. And Lord willing and board willing, it'll last way more than 2.5 years. I've got a long horizon, I think, and I feel really supported by the community, by my board, and by the people that I work with every day.
That's great. Good to hear that. So you got to this position, I think it was back in January you started this position officially?
So officially it was February 1st
Okay.
of this year. So I'm very privileged and honored that you had everybody in the county to be able to bring forward, and you took one of the least senior.
We're lucky to have you.
But I've been around a minute.
You
This
have.
this isn't my first stint in Kern County education. So
So you've been in the position about, 10 months now?
just about.
Any aha moments, wow, I didn't expect that kind of experiences, any surprises in the positive?
Lots of positive surprises. The amount of support that our community shows for education is overwhelming. We get you hear in the news the negative things about the detractors, and those are really just not the major part of our community. People want really good things to happen in schools, and people really believe in our community that really good things are happening, and I can attest to that. So I think that was one thing. I didn't know exactly how well received education was in Kern County, but we're seeing that. I see that every day. We're seeing that in the most recent election. Lots of bond issuances by sister districts were approved by our voters, which shows their ongoing support for the work that's being done and what the vision is for where Kern County's going. So I think that's probably, for me, that's probably been like the biggest aha. Not that I ever felt like, our community was in some way coming after schools, but the narrative out there isn't as positive as maybe I would like it to be, and maybe as it should be, for all of the kids that are affected in a positive way and find success and growth and exceed our expectations and our wildest dreams every day.
Yeah, great. So again, as we're going to jump now into the specific issue, AB 3216, the goal of this podcast is kind of look at those decisions that are made in Sacramento and kind of follow them down to the local level, and then kind of explore the implementation, the impact that those decisions have on students here in Kern County. How does the Kern High School District currently work with our Kern County representatives up in the state legislature to have your voice heard on specific fiscal or policy issues that are being considered in Sacramento?
First, I think we're very fortunate, and I'm looking at one of the big resources right now. Carlos, you do an amazing job. You're relatively new to your position,
Yes.
and you've plugged yourself in. And by plugging yourself in, I mean you know who the players are. You have audiences with them. You have conversations with them. And you bring us to the table with you.
We're going to have you here more often, Mike, with all those nice things about me. We're going to have you on this episode, on this show more often.
The only way I'm going to get my 5 guest appearances in. But no, that's a big deal. When you go to Sacramento and you speak on our behalf, when you're in a committee hearing and you're reaching out to superintendents or assistant superintendents of our districts here in Kern County and asking, what do you think about this position? What do you think about this potential amendment to a bill? That's hugely important because we know we're getting real-time feedback into the legislative process. So it starts with that there's this regular voice. You arrange for a cadre of local educators to go to Sacramento every year to meet with our local legislators and to make sure that them and their staffs understand kind of the position that Kern County has on various pieces of legislation. But beyond all of that, it's the availability of our local legislators. They don't hide from us. Right. You know, the people that represent Kern County and Sacramento are very available and very willing to have an audience and to discuss real items of concern and to hear our voice. You know, it doesn't always necessarily result in the results in Sacramento that Kern County is always advocating for. But it's certainly not for a lack of feeling that we're connected into the process. Yeah. Or that we're connected to the people that are literally on the legislative floor making policy on our behalf. Yeah.
And you said it earlier, and I agree, our legislators are an extension of our community that fully are supportive of education in Kern County, and they are interested in what's happening in our classroom. So we are very grateful for that.
Absolutely.
So AB 3216 says by July 1, 2026, every school district has to have a policy in place, either limiting or prohibiting the use of cell phones. Taking one step back from that, what is Kern High's current policy, if you have a policy, or practice as it relates to students carrying smartphones on campus?
So it's funny, we've had an electronic communications policy for a long time. Like, it used to talk about pagers and beepers being like the big issue. Yeah. And of course we had to outlaw those.
Dating ourselves here, Mike.
I know, but you know, we outlawed those, and you know, said you can't have those are bad. And over time, obviously, the technology has changed as a result, our policy has been updated over the years. But our board has been very proactive in understanding that electronic devices are you know, a little bit of a double-edged sword, blessing and a curse. That there is value to them, and at the same time, we need to control what's happening with them. Yeah. So we do have a policy in place that I believe actually meets the requirements of the current legislation. It does allow for the restriction of use and indicates that, you know, students should only be able to utilize their electronic devices with the express consent or direction of the instructor in that classroom. So like I say, our board has been very much on the front end of this. You know, obviously the devil remains in the details as to where we go from here.
Sure. It's good to hear that you guys have already been thinking about it and already have a policy in place addressing current issues. Do you anticipate this policy or this? Probably not, because you mentioned you already have the policy in place, but I'm just wondering if you anticipate any changes to the daily operations or the daily going-ons at your campuses when this bill is enacted July 1.
Well, I think there will be, and I think any school district who doesn't believe that there's implications whenever a new law is passed is a little bit kidding themselves. Whether, you know, we had this policy for a long time. We have had revisions to this policy over time, yet the inaction of this particular bill means that we're going to revive all of those conversations surrounding the benefits of technology in the classroom, the concerns or the threats that technology in the classroom poses, obviously specific to cell phones. And what's going on with cell phones is much different than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you know, not just because of the updates in phones, say, from what they were 10 years ago, but following the pandemic. And that takes us back 5 years, you know, now, where the value that a student places and that a parent places on that electronic device is much different than it was, you know, like I say, pre-pandemic. Yeah. The result of that means, yes, there's got to be operational changes in what's being addressed and how it's being addressed. And we've seen some of that already taking place in the current school year. But, you know, our board's been very specific about, you know, they want to see a task force developed that will allow us to hear the voices of various parts of our community. so that we can, affect the changes that the legislation is really pushing for.
Right.
And so, yeah, there will be change, even though I believe we have a compliant policy. It's one thing to have a compliant policy, it's another thing to act compliantly.
Correct.
Which is the question of how do you get that shift with our students,
Right.
and with our staff, to be able to address the issues that are going to naturally come up as a result.
Yeah, the stat that you mentioned, that's another caveat in this law, because I would imagine you would have teachers and staff who have different opinions on the use of technology in the classrooms, and some probably want it put away completely, some may want it used every now and then. So I'm curious, have you had any conversations with your bargaining units about this yet, or is it still a little bit too premature?
No, well, immediately when laws like this get passed, our bargaining units are very, very interested in what this is going to mean. And especially at the high school level, we teach such a broad variety of courses. If you're in a career technical education class and you're in a pre-fire department kind of training program, you don't even have a shot at having a phone, because that sucker's getting locked up in your locker because you've got to dress out and do PT, and you've got work to do. If you're in culinary arts, you've got work to do. If you're in a computer applications design course, yeah, the use of the cell phone is going to take on a whole different role, because you may be using it as a way to beta test some code that you're writing, or some kind of program that you're putting together. And then you transition that into a classroom environment. And, there are, positive things, applications or web portals that really do provide a lot of utility within the classroom. Without getting too specific, there's one called Kahoot, and it's kind of a real-time assessment program. We just discussed this, we just wrote about this, we just finished our kind of our concept map here. I think I need to do an assessment right now, and I want to give you real-time feedback as a student. Well, obviously that's a good way to use technology in the classroom.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, you mentioned Kahoot, and I actually used that as a teacher back in the day, so it's been around for a little bit, and the engagement that I saw happen with students was really positive and impactful.
I think kids want real-time feedback. I mean, we all do.
Sure.
We all want real-time feedback. We want to know that we're either mastering the content, or that we have more work to do. And, to give an essay and think that, in a week when I get the essay back, it'll have as much meaning as something could within literally just a few minutes.
Right.
It's certainly a different world that technology provides.
Correct. So some of the impetus behind this law is the research that shows that excessive use of cell phones has led to depression in youth, suicidal ideation, isolation, those kinds of things. We talked a little bit about the positive side of cell phones as an instructional tool. Have you seen or got to experience anything on your school campuses where kids have been negatively impacted by the use of cell phones?
I think coming out of the pandemic, we would all agree, and if you work with kids in any capacity, whether it's at a school or not, we would all agree that the world's much different now, and that student outlook on the world is much different. There's certainly more anxiety, more depression, more mental health issues, and so we are actively pursuing additional resources on our campuses to help address that. When it comes to the cause, yes, there's some belief that cell phone use, or the overuse of cell phone technology, contributes to that. More specifically, communication apps, social media in particular, is found to be particularly troublesome. At least that's what the research is telling us. So, in some ways, I appreciate the legislature's attempt to curtail the use of social media during the school day, by restricting the use of cell phones in general. But I think that we're talking, really, there's still a larger problem out there. A student who comes to us and 7.5 hours a day is with us still means that the vast majority of their time is off-site.
Absolutely.
And I think, one of the things that I've heard from parents is that they're very open to the idea of trying to help, but what can we do to engage them and giving them the tools to be able to help us when they're not necessarily at school for the majority of their day.
Yeah. You mentioned the social media, and there was a bill that was signed into law this year that authorizes school districts to adopt a policy prohibiting or limiting the use of social media on campuses. That's the initial first step they take there. I anticipate in the next year or two, you might see legislation that requires districts to now adopt a policy to limit or prohibit the use of social media. So kind of just tied to this bill, but kind of another extension of it.
And I think that really on some level, that's a question of technology.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. We were working with a student group on this issue, and one of the students mentioned to us almost all of my class, between my cell phone and the Chromebooks that we use to access assignments or to do research or to write papers and whatnot, get presentations ready. We can access social media in almost every classroom one way or another. And we've got to remember, kids are kids have been figuring out ways around the rules as long as there's been rules in school.
Absolutely.
So, to think that we're going to, be able to limit the specific use of the device in some way, on some level, I think that's a question really for social media companies. They can geofence us and tell us where we are and whether or not it's near a school or during the specific time of day when kids should be in school. Heck, I think that would be most interesting, so if some of our truants didn't have access to social media during the day, maybe they'd come to school
Right.
because they're not getting the social media fix that maybe is keeping some of them away.
Sure. Yeah. And we talked a little bit about this earlier, but if you can just kind of touch again on what is your approach, your philosophy in terms of balancing the limiting of the use of cell phones and also incorporating them as an instructional tool. Do you have a specific approach to that, a philosophy? How do you balance those two?
So part of that is based upon the classroom and the classroom environment that's taking place. So there is naturally going to be a lot of responsibility on teachers. And that goes with any kind of policies or procedures that really try to restrict what students are doing in the way that they're interacting with each other or with adults. And that's really what makes our teachers, so special, is their ability to balance all of these directives and all of these expectations, and at the same time still be able to deliver their content in a way that students can master and grow academically and also grow socially.
Yeah.
So it starts at that teacher level. And, we know that the campuses that are most successful in restricting cell phone use right now are the ones who have really listened to their teacher voice about what they need in order to be successful in limiting cell phone use. When those teachers are able to set their expectations and those expectations can be supported by administration, that goes a long way. All that to be, to say at the same time, we're not going to suspend kids over cell phone use.
Right.
The law doesn't really allow for us to suspend over disruptions or to suspend over defiance. So, a lot of teachers, would really like to have that mechanism to try and enforce the cell phone policy. A lot of times teachers, are trying to make contact with parents. And we need the support of parents if we're going to restrict student use on cell phones. And we all know that any kind of restrictions we have on cell phones are still going to have to fit in the world of the student who needs it for medical reasons. Students that utilize it to monitor blood sugar and administer insulin. They need continuous access to their cell phone. And, that's one, easy to come up with example, but lots of kids have lots of conditions.
Sure.
That really require exemptions to some type of a full-blown exemption from access.
Yeah. It's to your point, it's a multifaceted issue that has a lot of little caveats within it. And I truly appreciate, Mike, you spending the time with us this morning to share your insight. You clearly have thought about this issue quite a bit. And I thank you for your leadership at the Kern High School District and all the great things you're doing for the kids there. And truly appreciate your partnership throughout this, through the work that I'm doing as well. You've been a huge help for me as I hear from the practitioners in the field who are doing the work of implementing these laws. So thank you for doing that. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, and thank you for having me.
You bet. Anything else that I haven't asked that you might want to add to this conversation?
I think what you said at the end about the complexity, our board is very supportive, but they'd like to see some clarity in terms of what's happening. I don't think that's an unreasonable request. Our teachers are extremely involved, would like to have voice and be able to be heard in the process. Our students, believe it or not, they really take ownership of this issue. And obviously their perspective is maybe a little bit different than what the adults have. And then you just have your community as a whole and the parents that are part of that. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Agreed.
And, if it was easy, we would have longer than 2.5-year tenures for superintendents in the state of California.
Yeah.
But that's okay. Taking on and doing the hard work is what it's about, because at the end of the day, we're going to do our best to do what's right for kids. And student success is still of paramount importance in our mission to provide the support that students need to be successful. I think that as long as we keep that at the forefront of our thoughts, we'll be able to navigate this as we navigate most anything.
Yeah. Well, if you haven't heard it lately from a parent of students who went through the Kern High School District, thank you so much for your leadership and for all the work that you guys are doing in Kern High. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you for listening to the Classroom and the Capitol podcast. Join us again next time as we continue to explore the connection between decisions made at the California State Capitol and classrooms in Kern County and beyond. Production facilities for this podcast are provided by KETN, a service of the Kern County Superintendent of Schools Office.